We live. We live.
Is we? Hold on. I don't. Hold on.
We
Co-
live.
I don't see it, man.
You just told me that we
Oh.
live, Kofi.
Oh, okay. We live. I see it. I see it.
Kofi, we on your channel, right? Not the Mossy.
Oh, we on. Yeah, we on my channel. Okay. All right. First I want to say ETM Hotel. Dual Duau. Dual Aku. Dual Nature. Ren E Kofi. Paisai. Fatmo Alafie. Fatmo Iwa Pele. Igun Majube Iba E, Igun Kiki, Igun Gun. Want to give honor and praises to the ancestors because again, without the ancestors, we wouldn't be here. I want to welcome you back to Kofi Paisai TV, also Black Power, Black African Power. All right, brother Uncle say, today I got my brother Vyasa Niccolo Gullah, who's gonna be presenting some information. Today, I am excited. Well, we all excited. I got Enia Red Sean Calfunny on the platform, Satepa Ra Mary Amin on the platform. I got T'Challa Bangara, who's also on the platform as well. I'm gonna share my screen. We're gonna go ahead and get started. Please share the show. We want to apologize for starting late. We had some technical difficulties. Brother Vasa, Sean wanted me to let the people know that Brother Vasa has an Apple laptop, and that was the issues with us starting late. Um, real quick, and man,
Okay.
I'm doing something else different. Hold on. Okay.
Say hello
Dang.
to
I can't. Oh, God, let me share my screen. I'm sorry. Himself is a superb and supreme creature of creation. Over the knowledge of himself, he becomes master of his environment, the captain of his own ship, the director of his own destiny, the accomplisher of his own ends. Man should understand himself because man is full of knowledge, and this knowledge is a gift of nature. When Mother Nature created man, she deprived him of nothing. He was given the faculty of understanding all things around him. This faculty for understanding has not been taken away from him. None of his senses have been taken away from him. So there is no excuse for the black man. I'm raising my team, red, black, and green, queens and kings, salute, now scream, I should bring purple of the hidden, I should vibe with different. I'm raising my team, red, black, and green, queens and kings, salute, now scream, I should bring purple of the hidden, I should vibe with different, I should. All right. I always on my platform, I always want to do a Hotep Dino suit to the ancestors, those who have transitioned. Um, so we're gonna do a Hotep Dino suit on Edward P. Maccabi, I think I'm pronouncing it right. And after I do the Hotep Dino suit, I let Bro Vasa speak briefly about who Edward P. Maccabi is. So at the top here, you have the sesh here at the middle, you have the transliteration, and at the bottom, you have the translation. I'm going to read the transliteration and the translation. Hotep Dino Su Wasid Neb Dedu Netcha A Neb Abdu DF Paret Correct in Hinket Ket Apet Sesh Minket Neb Neferet Wabet Unket Netcha M in Ka in Imaku Ma Koru, an offering in which a king's give, Wusir, Lord of Jadu, the great deity, Lord of Obitus, that he may give a voice offering of cow, filin, linen, alabaster, and all that is good and pure things in which a deity lives. To the revered ones, Edward P. McCabe, justified. Makaru means justified or true uh, a voice. So I always want to give a Hotep Duna suit, an offering to our late and great ancestors who have passed and transitioned. Bro Vyasa, you could speak real briefly about who Edward P. McCady is for those that may not know who he is.
Okay. He's still a character that I'm still studying. What I found intriguing and what allured me to studying him is in a lot of Oklahoma Black history books, you'll see a short paragraph and they'll mention his name. And in that mentioning, they'll say that Edward P. McCady pushed for an all-Black state at a presidential level. And if I'm not mistaken, I know for certain he met with President Harrison, and I want to say he met with Roosevelt afterwards. We can say in between 1890 and right before Oklahoma became statehood. So let's say in between 1890 and 1905, he was pushing an agenda to have Oklahoma become an all-Black state. He rose to political power. I believe he was born in New York and studied law there, and then moved to Kansas. This is in the Bleaton, Kansas era when he was there. From there, he moved to Oklahoma and began trying to promote the idea of Oklahoma becoming an all-Black state. And like I said, it's still hard to find a lot of information on him. I haven't seen any books dedicated to him as a set subject, but I do think he's a character worth studying. There's numerous articles out there about him. Unfortunately, they're hard to track down, but the fact that he pushed for it, the fact that it was getting accepted, it was being highly promoted, I think is something that we should talk about, especially when we have whispers within the community of so many saying we need to push for an all-Black town. We need Black legislatures. We need Black judges. We need some way to protect us. So I feel like this could be something to do a state case study on, and hopefully build from where our ancestors left off in this fight for liberation.
All right. All right. And everybody knows this is my saying, as I learn, we all learn. Again, I think this is a powerful statement. I think as we continue to grow and learn things, I think the only way, well, one of the ways, I'm not going to say the only way, but one of the ways for us to be able to succeed and excel is take the information that we learn and share that information with each other. And I can say that we are doing that quite well. Every brother on the panel is doing that. The Mossy is doing that. The Amarad Squad is doing that. The Echo Squad is doing that. NBK is doing that. So we have some people who are out here taking what they learn and sharing what they learn with the family. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. A second. Stop sharing my screen. But before I let Brother Vyasa do his presentation, like I said, I got a few other brothers on the panel, so I'm allowed them to speak. I always want to let my brothers speak if they on the panel before we get started.
Okay, I'll go ahead and kick it off. This is Satep. I'm happy to be on the panel with the brother Niccolo. I don't know him very well, but he seemed like a very intelligent brother just from the 30 minutes we've been online. You know what I'm saying? So the dream of an all-Black state, that's something I'm very interested in hearing about. So yeah, I hope y'all tune in. I hope y'all got your pen and pads. Let's support this brother and let's dream of an all-Black state. Peace.
All right, I just want to say I'll go ahead, Sean. Okay. Just want to say it's an honor to be on the panel as always. These brothers, they always talking about the kind of things that I think about daily. And so just ready for this presentation. Definitely need an all-Black state. We need something that we can have for us exclusively. So I'm looking forward to it.
ETM Hotel, Rennie Sean. Welcome in peace. My name is Sean. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Vyasa about to rip it. He's about to drop some history on us that we haven't gotten. So this is gonna be exclusive right here. This is lame, man. So we're gonna appreciate it. And Voss, it's on you, bro.
Okay. First, I want to say peace to all the brothers on the panel. Peace to everybody in the chat and that may watch this in the future. I have to make a disclaimer and give honor to Brother Kofi for being who he is as an individual. Um, he sought me out of a chat one day. We immediately started building from there. From that point, he asked me if I would speak, and he kept reiterating that according to him, I have a mind that he feels that should be shared. And I can appreciate that. It's not too often that you see somebody reach down to pull someone up. And that was one of the quotes my grandmother gave to me many, many times. Is the only time you look down is if you have the intentions to pull somebody up. With that being said, when he asked me to speak, I had no set subject in mind. I didn't want to just speak from personal experiences that I've gone through. So in the past 30 days, I went from having one paragraph to build from to ordering at least 15 books. I didn't get to complete all of them, but I will do my best to build on some of the things I've seen, some of the conversations that's been taking place within the community, and particularly that whole Aboriginal Black man to the Americas conversation. I do agree that some of us may very well have had Indian relations. I don't necessarily agree we was here first in the content that they tell it, but I will show and try to give correlations to hopefully bring better understanding on our plight here as the conversation progresses throughout this presentation. And with that said, I'll begin now.
Switch the screen, Kofi. We can't see a screen.
Oh, I already switched past the title. Let me know when y'all can see.
I can see it on mine. I think you might have to click on his, Satep.
All right, yeah, we good.
Kofi got to click on this Voss screen. Kofi, we can't hear you. Your mic muted while you talking to yourself.
I said they said they can see it. I got it locked on him. Satep, can you see it now?
Yeah, I see it now.
Okay.
Everybody
Yeah.
in the chat can see?
Yeah, go back to your first slide, though. Go back to your first slide.
Oh, I don't know how I would do that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Are we ready?
Yeah, we good.
All right. This is the dream of an all-black state, and I'll begin now. It's Africans in the New World. It is stated that the explorer Vasco Nunez del Balboa found a colony of blacks in southern Central America in or around the year 1513 Common Era in the Darien Gap. The theory exists that these people may have been Ethiopian pirates who were shipwrecked. It's important to note that according to some sources between the years 1510 and 1535, the native people of this area are documented to be completely exterminated. You also have Juan Corredo, Handsome John, a free African who traveled from parts of Florida to Mexico and is stated to be the first farmer to sow wheat in America in the year 1513. As early as the 16th century, documents state that African males have explored Northern America. Estevan, more recently, they starting to call him Stephen the Moor. I haven't found anything to classify him as a Moor. One of the things that I did see about him is in order for him to make the explorations over here, he had to convert to Catholicism. That may be very well why he's not considered a Muslim or a Moor, but I haven't seen anything other than he say or she say to prove that he was a Moor. These explorations of land consisted of Florida, the Gulf of Mexico, and as far as New Mexico. And this statement down below is from a book called The Black History of Oklahoma. It says, both as slaves and free men, Africans came early to America or Oklahoma. They pointed the way to it, they explored it, they settled it, they helped shape its destiny, and they made a notable, fascinating contribution. And its history started and began with Estevan. San Miguel de Guadalupe. The idea of the first non-native settlers in North America to remain long-term were Africans. In 1526, near Georgetown, South Carolina, or Sapelo Islands in Georgia. Now, if they was in the second one, y'all have to forgive me if I don't pronounce a lot of these names right. If they was from Sapelo Islands, Georgia, that gives you the first black settlers of America. Well, the first black, well, let me rephrase it. The first non-native settlers in America being from the same hometown as Michelle Obama. That was something I found later on. Lucas Vasquez de Allen and Francisco Gordelo began to attempt to establish a colony there, along with an estimated 600 settlers and roughly 100 horses, along with 100 well-seasoned African slaves. These Africans, as well as a group of native peoples thought to be Gullah people, would one day form a revolt. This would be considered the first documented slave revolt in North America. The slave revolt took place after mishaps in the death of Allen. The death of more than 2/3 of the settlers due to sicknesses like malaria, hunger, and the harshness of winter gave rise to this story and revolt. This story gives ideas of the birth of a new name of a Native American tribal group, the Yamasee Gullah, and that Gullah is thought to be connected with the Gullah people in the forms of etymology. Here's a quote that I found from an author named by the last name of Maine. I can't remember which book this was in. It said the insurrection burned down the colony within a few months, putting it to an end. It's widely thought that the slaves ran away and made their homes with local Gullah Indians. If so, they were the first long-term residents of what is now the United States from across the Atlantic. The Great Dismal Swamp is not far from there. Located in Virginia and in North Carolina, Great Dismal Swamp will be debated as one of the earliest times, is debated on its earliest times of human inhabitants. By humans partially become, I wish I had time to proofread all this, y'all, please forgive me. Because of the conditions there of this swamp, it's hard for them to date the bodies. You got to think this is a swampy area, so things decay totally different. So they haven't been able to actually verify how old the remains they have found there. However, one thing for certain, sources state repeatedly, Seminole, Cimarron, Maroons, and Africans, and the premise being solely runaway Black Africans are thought to be there, with numbers ranging from 2,000 to 10,000 runaway slaves taking refuge in these swamps from the dates according some early as the 1600s to the middle of the 19th century. Some areas are thought to have been a part of the Underground Railroad system, and Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote her second book, A Dread Tale of the Great Dismal Swamp, dedicated to this idea. Bolas, a weapon used for hunting, has been argued to be found there. This goes with saying that Northern American tribal groups inhabited the area. Now, the thing about that is the Bolas weapon is basically a string with two rocks tied on the end that you would throw at something like a bird, wrap around it, and capture your prey that way. The thing about that weapon is it's a Southern American weapon. I haven't seen anybody in the Northern Americas use it. Um, Another thing I found interesting about it is the first documented Maroon chief in the Southern Americas happened to have the last name of Bolas, Juan D. Bolas, and this revolt took place in Jamaica. The relationships between Native American Indian relationships with African Americans. The relationship between Native American tribal groups or peoples and Africans imported to the United States region is, in what documented history we have, is very complex to say the least. Almost that of a very bad domestic relationship, the makeup, breakup, abuse, and trauma. But there's also a level of compassion and an everlasting bonding took place. High levels of respect have been demonstrated as well. And like most relationships, majority of the ill-managed situations seem to have been formed by outside parties more often than not. Early American policymakers and reformers drawn on Enlightenment ideas about mankind's potential for progress envisioned Indians, unlike Africans and their American-born descendants, as one day moving closer to white Americans' higher rings of civilization. You can see this in practice by observing the ideology of the slave practices being introduced to native tribal groups. We cannot deny that by this era of colonization, the center point of focus after the 1620s was to gain dominance over the minds and bodies of African people. We must also not neglect the previous attacks on native people groups, the push to gain control of their lands, areas, whether they was hunting grounds or dwelling places, the push to control their economic trade systems, and over a 200-year time frame, altering their indigenous beliefs. We must comprehend the influence of popular theorists on European minds as well, in the likeness of people like Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Rousseau, and their contributions to the social contract theory. In particular, John Locke's idea of natural right to life, liberty, and property. While Europe itself was making the shift from a feudalistic society to practicing mercantilism and later becoming a full-out capitalistic society, the first remedy of prevention is to remove by all means possible the material cause of sedition, whereof we spoke, which is want, poverty in the estate, to which purpose serve the opening and well balance of trade, the cherishing of manufacturers, the banishing of idleness, the repression of waste, the excess of sumptuary laws, the improvement of husbanding soil, the regulation of prices, the vendible, the moderation of taxes and tributes, and the like. And one thing about the social contract theory that I was taught, to just make it simple of what people, for people out there, if you haven't heard of this, you had a shift from people taking care of themselves, hunting, growing goods. And as time progressed and society become more economic trade, things become closer. You got the Silk Road. This is taking place in Europe, really. As they began to expand out, of course, their ideologies began to change. Now, another thing you have going on over there is the fight for control, the fight in between nations, who's going to have power, how to create a class system. So the idea of a social contract theory was going against laws of nature, saying that the average man would give up his natural rights, the ability to feed himself, hunt for himself, provide shelter for himself. If a government provided those things for him, he would gladly trade, because in those things, through their eyes, is constant war. It's a constant fight to have to hunt. It's a constant fight to have to fish for goods. It's a constant fight to find clothing, warmth, shelter, and things of that nature. You see this ideology being pushed in reverse by the time they come to the Americas. You'll see little mentions of this as I carry on. Anthony Dixon, author of Florida's Negro War, states the difference between English and Spanish history pertaining Africans and Indians and the relationship between the two in North Americas was English records display Indian slaves as merely circumstantial materials, and Spain had written records dating to 1503 Common Era. Governor Nicholas de Ovando of Hispaniola solicited that no Negro slave should be sent to Hispaniola for they fled amongst Indians who taught them their customs, and they never could be captured. By 1687, accounts of black slaves attempting to escape the cruelties of colonial slavery to Spanish Florida from St. George, Carolina. You have a report. These are the names I found. These are the first documented slaves from the North coming into Florida. Conan, Jesse, Jackie, Grand Domingo, Cabo, Dak, and Robbie, and the mention of a 3-year-old child whose name is not stated. The Spanish, yeah.
Oh, no, you would say so. These are the names of the very first people that actually went into St. Augusta, Florida.
Well, as I progressed in my research, I found out that that may not be actually true, but this is the first report of Carolina documenting their slaves run away, if that makes sense. Now, naturally you had slaves there because you already had the Spanish colonizing the area.
Right.
You had people from the Caribbeans. You got to understand that Spain, they empire at the time went from Southern America all through Mexico and up to above Kansas at the moment in modern. So they, there was slaves all over the place. And one thing that I found out is wherever they went, you see what the Southern Americas classify as Cimarron communities. This would be black runaways, establishing their own communities all throughout Southern America and parts of Mexico. The Spanish governor, Gorrega, would assign each of these individuals occupational purposes to suit his needs. However, unlike the bondage of colonial slavery, each individual was compensated by payment, giving scholars who studied this particular case the impression that their legal status was changed from slaves to free people. While European colonists would come to Florida roughly a year later to attempt to retrieve these individuals, after they married, converted to Catholicism, and maintained a value in the occupational services of Spanish Florida, compelling Correga to deny and dismiss any idea of handing them over. Also note that these individuals pleaded for their lives and feared death had they been returned, setting in motion a series of events that would lead to King Charles II's royal decree stating, "Give liberty to all men as well as the women, so that by their example and my liberty, others will do the same." We could debate whether this was done to demonstrate humanity towards Africans in the region or to use Africans as pawns to attempt to weaken English colonial powers, generally dividing and breaking all fractions and combinations that adverse to the state, setting them at distance or at least distrust among themselves is not one of the worst remedies. That was a quote from Francis Bacon talking about this very issue. During this period, yes, Native Americans were captured, enslaved in Carolina's slave markets, particularly women, to be used as house servants or field laborers. This was primarily due to circumstances pertaining to the amount of time required to import slaves from the Congo region of Africa. And this practice of Indian slavery would not be long-lived. But Indian slavery never extensive in the never extensively existed in the British domains. Balaga's writings of Virginia says that popular sentiment had never demanded the subjugation of the Indian race per se, actual as practically the case with the Negro in the first Slave Act of 1661, but only a portion of it, and admittedly a very small portion. In the case of the Indian, slavery was viewed as of an occasional nature, a preventative penalty, and not a normal and permanent condition. In New England colonies, Indian slavery was unprofitable. For slavery of any kind was unprofitable because it was unsuited to the diversified agriculture of these colonies. In addition, the Indian slave was insufficient. The Spaniards discovered that one Negro was worth 4 Indians. That was in Williams' book, Capitalism and Slavery. Eric Williams, if I'm not mistaken. There's also the idea that since England itself never sanctioned any laws pertaining Indians as slaves, but focused primarily on the African slave trade instead, that the colonists, at random times, mainly for quick profits, the removal of certain groups or war captives would bend laws to involve Indian slaves for each colony's benefit at random times. Since it never was sufficiently extensive to the interference of the Negro slavery trade, it never was receiving any attention from the home government. And so it existed as legal because never declared illegal. Numerous events take place to keep in mind at this time. Between the settlements, while Florida seeing an increase of migrated Africans escaping slavery from northern colonies, there was also the constant feud between Spain and other European powers, the English, French, etc., over power of not just the newfound lands, but the control of the seas and the newly forming world trade system. Carolina itself had the dilemma of maintaining its slave force to maintain the increased demand of its cash crop, rice in particularly. It's alluded that the rice production in Carolina doubled in between 1720 and 1748, reaching up to 43 million pounds a year. This would require the demand of up to 35 to 40 slaves at a time to cultivate, irrigate these rice swamps and marshes, with Florida seeing an increased number of Africans coming in. The Spanish name Cimarron in this area of Spanish Florida becomes into application, and Carolina will begin to establish new Negro laws and codes to combat its loss and constant demand of slaves. It is important to note that the first time Spain will refer to Africans as Cimarrones is dated back to the early 1500s in Panama, and it is highly possible that these Cimarrones helped establish English colonies both directly and indirectly with Walter Raleigh and Francis Drake. The Seminoles demonstrate the importance of ethnomy, the naming of a social, political, tribal, or ethnic groups by their own members by outsiders. The naming, he says, was in response to European pressures for the tribe is entirely a post-European phenomenon, a replacement by Creek settlers of Florida Aborigines, whom they eliminate in frontier military campaigns growing out of antagonism between European powers. While we are often taught to focus primarily on European, British, French, Spain, and Portuguese, etc., involvement in the chattel slavery, it's important to also gain comprehension on the Native American tribal groups involved in this economic practice. Through much of the 18th century, Choctaw and Chickasaw man inserted themselves directly into the business of chattel slavery, working not only as slave catchers, but also as slave traders in early irritations of domestic slaves trade.
Hey, can you right there? And see,
Mhm.
that's what I've been talking about. Like most of the times when you see those Native American tribes, a lot of these people that's pushing this aboriginal things, a lot of them you will see that they are part of the Choctaw Nation, they are part of the Chickasaw, uh, they are part of the Creek, and etc. Especially these five tribes. Just two of them that you named, the Choctaw and the Chickasaw, um, is a part of the five civilized tribes that the European gave these particular five this name. Because civilized is because they started to they started to take on this economic practice that the Europeans had. You know what I'm saying? That's owning slaves. You know what I'm saying? Taking on the practice. You had a lot of Native American tribes, such as the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Creek, the Seminole, and the Cherokee that actually converted into Christianity. That actually um, 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 started doing certain things on the land, adopting the bylaws and laws of the lands of the Europeans and etc. So I'm just saying right here where you saying they started to take these practices on. So people act like that the Native Americans and these names keep coming up. These particularly names, I don't care where you go, you're gonna always see Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, Cherokee, uh, Seminole, you're going to see these names pop up all over the place. And this is because these are the Native Americans who actually started to uh, enslave African people, you know what I'm saying, and take on this economic practice, you know what I'm saying, free labor, you know what I'm saying, even though it wasn't as harsh as the European was. But I just wanted to highlight that what you were saying right there, because some people look at me crazy when I go to talking about how they started to take on uh, the economic practices as the Europeans did, and these certain names that I keep mentioning coming up.
No, you absolutely right. I can't verify it, but in my heart of hearts, I feel that the word Seminole don't even belong to that particular group of people. I believe it was superimposed on them in an attempt to cover up so many slave revolts happening with African people in that region. Um, if you look at the dates for majority of these revolts, you see that they mirror in with the Haitian Revolution. Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And like I haven't, well, I kind of gave light to it that the word Seminole comes from the word Cimarron. Both
Right.
are thought to mean runaway,
Right.
wild, escaped slave, etc.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But you can't find it in any of the Creek languages to say this is where we got it from. I haven't been able to see it, and I don't study language, but I've spent 30 days straight looking into it, and I haven't found it. You can look, even the Taino people, they started using the word Cimarron. Last night I found in the Mende dialect that you have a word Simaru, and that Simaru, a rough translation in English would be a man and woman getting together. It's more vulgar than that. It's more adult. I'll let y'all use your imaginations. I don't want to cuss on the chat, and I'll do my best not to along the way. But you can even see it as far as in Africa. The word semi, I showed you that one, referring to a short weapon. Then you
Mm-hmm.
can look at the word noli in a lot of Latin languages. That means don't touch me. So there's a lot to play with that word, but I think it was superimposed on them. I'm gonna show you where I think it took place at here in a few more slides. Another contributing action of the time to observe is the concepts of marriage and how this was more often than not used to gain political, economic, and some, oh, I don't know where I got guessing at, and to some, a tool possibly even to gain the most basic needs, respect as a human being and freedom. Christian marriage, perhaps surprisingly, was also the goal of some natives. By marrying their daughters to Spaniards in Christian ceremonies, elite Indians could reinforce their status. For many Spaniards, though, a Taino ceremony was more useful than a Christian wedding. Only through marrying a native woman could a low-ranking Spaniard gain access to the goods and workers controlled by the high-status Indians. You got to remember, and I'm going to speak on it eventually, these were matrilineal people, meaning everything went through the woman. Your bloodline, ranks, all that went through women.
Talking about the Native
Yeah.
American.
Yeah, is no different than what you see in a lot of African tribes as well. It was matrilineal. Now we
Right,
have
right.
to make a distinction in between matrilineal and matrifocal. When you look at matrifocal, that solely applies to Caribbean. Well, I'm not going to say it solely applies, but it's more often applied to Caribbean area African groups. And the way they define matrifocal would be me, you, and all the brothers on the panel go hunting. And in that midst of going hunting, we leave the women alone. Well, common sense would say that they have to take care of home, tend to children, and make sure that the day-to-day routine responsibilities are met. So the term they'll use for that is matrifocal. But you also got to understand that they was playing gender games as well. When we look back at that social contract theory, how Indians would hunt. Well, they'll start to use that saying, no, you're not supposed to hunt for your food. You're supposed to buy it. Going hunting is a leisurely thing. You're supposed to work doing A, B, and C. You're supposed to be like us. That was all, the vocabulary games and the mind games of switching people out of their native customs.
Yeah, you spoke of the match. I mean, with the matrilineal thing, like I keep reiterating too. Like a lot of those uh 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 our African ancestors who mingled for over 500 some years. You know what I'm saying? 500 some years that they was in contact with the Native American, whether it was in North Carolina, South Carolina, whether it was in Oklahoma, whether it was down in Florida, which Florida became a safe haven, then Mexico became a slave haven, and then them coming back into Texas. So we've been amongst them for 500 some years. But in order for you to be identified as a certain type of tribe, when you dealing everything went through the woman, when you talk about the matrilineal, especially with the Native American, in order for you to be, like I kept saying, if my sister married a Native American man, if she had a child, the child nor her wouldn't even be recognized, as she could practice those customs, but she wouldn't be recognized, and the child would be recognized as a Choctaw, a Chickasaw, a Creek, and I'm just naming these five. There are plethoras of other Native American tribes out there, especially when we get to the Texas area where they talk about these radical Indians. But if I married a Native American woman, and I wouldn't be recognized as a Creek, but my offspring will be recognized because it went through the womb of a woman, a matrilineal. So my son or my daughter would be a Creek, or she would be identified as a Creek, but I wouldn't be identified as a Creek. So it did vice versa with the woman. The woman wearing a Native American man, the woman nor the child is identified as they could practice to take on those customs, but they wouldn't be officially recognized as a member of that tribe unless it went through the womb of a Native American woman when you're dealing with that matrilineal system.
Yeah, and you basically took the next sentence.
Oh, I'm sorry, bro.
No,
I'm sorry.
no, it's no problem. I mean, that's just confirmation towards these ideas. I'm just saying I agree with you. One thing I do want to throw out so I don't confuse people. Anything you see in black, that's me writing. Anything you see in red, that's from a different author. But this sentence right here, the sons born to unions of Euro-American men and Indian women rose to prominence not because their fathers were white, but because they were related to politically powerful men through their mothers. The same thing that you just heard Kofi speak on. Simultaneously, prominent Indians of these tribes would gain economic power by being able to join the trade markets and even more access to owning slaves as private property. Some of the Seminole chiefs found that prestige was directly related to the numbers of blacks they owned or gave refuge to. Although, like most southern eastern tribal groups who practice matrilineal concepts in Florida, amongst the Seminole, a pattern of marriage between Indian men and African women became hard to determine whether it was relationships built off mutual agreement or slavery. 1821 Rose Sena Factor documents these aspects who, y'all got to forgive me. I should have proofread this. I just didn't have time. But Rose Sena Factor was a runaway. She was captured by some Creek Indians, and she was given to or sold to a Seminole chief named Black Factor. Black Factor, in returns, gives Rose to his son, Sam Factor. In the year, and years later, the father dies in 1835. Sam, after marrying Rose, would free her and her children. But after the death of Sam's father, the chief, his sister would come and claim that she had ownership over Rose and her children. Around this time, frame, the status of blacks must be reminded that they're not solely runaway slaves. Some records from as early as the 1500s show free blacks in this area. Traces of blacks owning land almost hundreds of years before this. There's even records of blacks petitioning the kings because their rights and lands were being taken for risk. I put a sub note to myself saying that we need to understand that they may have been free technically, but still at a vassal or serf level, implying that they would have worked the land, they would have had some rights, but they were still held under the tutelage of kings and higher powers. So they wasn't totally, none of them was there by choice. Let's put it like that. Even the story of a free black woman owning her own business, selling baked goods exists at that time frame. Women were also of value to the Seminole Indians, for they were efficient trackers, traders, horticulturists, engineers, artisans, guides, and inventors, introducing skills acquired from plantation experiences such as spinning cloth and candle making. As land rights became the most dominant ideology to fight over, alliances began forming amongst once rivals, and friends now became enemies. However, evidence does indicate that marriage between blacks and Indians were less common than noted by earlier studies. The practice of intermarriage seems to apply more so to the leadership circles of the two groups and less between the commoners amongst blacks and Indians. The fugitives resided in their own separate, autonomous, often isolated maroon communities, maintained their African-born traditions, and were defiant in retaining their freedom. One of those traditions was the way they named their children. A lot of them you'll see carry Mende names, and a lot of Western African traditions, in particular naming your children after the days of the week. I was gonna put a list of all the names that could be found back then and do the correlations. I just didn't have time to slide it in.
Well, you say a lot of the Seminoles names was named after the weeks, you say?
Yeah, a lot of them.
Yeah, that goes all the way back to the Khan people when you start dealing with the naming of each individual. Like my name is Kofi Paisa. That's in a Khan name, so all of it deals with um the day that you was born. Like I was born on a Friday, and I'm the firstborn. So that's what Kofi Paisa means. Born on Friday, firstborn, which is in a Khan name, which you will see. Not, I mean, because when you talk about a lot of those people that left North Carolina and left Georgia, that went into Fort Moss, went into different areas in St. Augusta, Florida. Those people was a mix of different ethnic groups. When we deal with the Gullah people, and you mentioned the Mende people, so when you go and look at the Gullah people in those areas, a lot of those names you can see. Like I trace back a lot of those Khan names because a lot of those people that was actually kidnapped and Bronx to Bronx Island, and then from Bronx Island they was shipped to South Carolina and Georgia, which you mentioned the swamps earlier.
Yeah.
On the previous slide, and that is because those people were different ethnic groups migrated into Sierra Leone and Liberia, which was those were the Pacific areas in Africa. They didn't kidnap the people. That individual, one of the owners that owned Bronx Island, and another plantation owner, they were the ones that actually target a Pacific area in Africa, and that was nowhere but Sierra Leone and Liberia. But you had a lot of ethnic groups, as far as the Akan people, who migrated into Liberia and Sierra Leone. You had the Mende people, you had the Gala people, the Kissi, the Limba, the Timbi people who was already there. You had the Va people that was already there. So it was an ethnic group of a lot of people, and a lot of groups were smaller groups who amalgamated together. So they began to intertwine their traditions. So you will start to see that a lot of those traditions and those names was brung over here, South Carolina, North Carolina, and then when you start to see a lot of them run away into the safe haven place of St. Augusta, where the Spain was offering themselves safe refuge in order for them to fight with British, because British was trying to help. Well, the British was actually trying to take Florida away from Spain at this particular time. So they were just trying to get more manpower to fight the British. So you will start to see the Gala people when they went in. You start to see those names start to surface everywhere. You will see a Ya, you will see a Kofi, you will see a Paisai, you will see all these different names that the people that is now called the Seminoles or the Cimarroons have, which are the same people.
Yeah. And since you brought up St. Augustine, before I forget, because I didn't write it down in here, a less known fact about the establishment of St. Augustine is the fact that you had a lot of free blacks, at least 10 to 15% of the population at the time. I know that's not a huge number, but given circumstances, that's something worth bragging about on this fact of blacks helped establish the first actual long-term settlement in America as well. So not only was black people or Africans the first people from across the waters to be long-term settlers, you turn right back around and years later, you contributed to the first long-term settlement being established. And the reason why I brought up dwellings is because I want people to try to see the correlation of the traditions traveling across the water. And this is a statement by an Englishman in the 1820s as he was going through Florida. It appeared to consist of about 100 houses, many of them elevated on poles from 2 to 6 feet high and built of unhung logs with roofs of barks and little patches of Indian corn before the doors. The women were hard at work, digging the grounds, pounding Indian corn, and carrying heavy loads of water from the river. The men were either setting out to the woods with their guns or lying idle before the doors, and the children were amusing themselves in the little groups. The whole scene reminded me strongly of some of the African towns described by Mungo Park. And if I'm not mistaken, he was, I don't know what country he was from, but he was one of the first explorers, I think, to reach Far East Africa. I think he did a lot of exploring on the Niger River. And that's why a lot of people turn to him, at least in European studies, to find their ways of navigating. This quote here that I'm about to quote is from a children's book. I try to keep things balanced. I think this is a good book for anybody who has children 10 and under. If they want to study this subject, it's specifically dedicated to Fort Mose and Francisco Mendez, the leader when it became all black, what you would nowadays call base or settlement. Most residents of Mose lived in small, often oval-shaped, palm-thatched huts outside the fort. These huts, known as chosas, were described as resembling thatched Indian huts and may have been much like the dwellings the Africans had in their homelands. According to most sources pertaining the dwelling domains of the Creek Seminole Native people groups, you see a transition via literature that states they begin to mimic log cabin homes after the arrival of European groups, with the that should have been constant, with the constant emphasis that the Greek Seminole people groups did not identify with African blacks as part of their culture in any fashion, and that they lived separately and maintained their own customs and practices. And down here below, it shows you a depiction of what the houses they found at the time, the different styles. The above bigger picture, I don't know how this would look on y'all screen. It's on my right. It could possibly be your right or left. I don't know how it's going to broadcast. That's a drawing of a Creek village. Now, remember they said we was living in round houses. Just remember that. The fugitives resided in separate, autonomous, often isolated maroon communities, maintained their African-born traditions, and were defiant in retaining their freedom. The preface of Y.N. Clyde's works brings an important thought to researchers by stating that throughout Anglo-American history, the African American has faced two dilemmas in recording the annuals of human events. One, the propaganda to promote the African American has no valid history worthy of mentioning. Secondly, the transition of the idea of the African only being worthy of historical mentioning by taking on European customs, and any attempt to maintain African traditions was proof of their savagery. This above left picture where you see them on a boat is another depiction of how the villages looked as English became into Florida. This is at that time frame in between 1790 and 1850s.
So this is when the British defeated Spain. You saying?
Yeah. Yeah. In that epic of time.
Which was a short period of time. They didn't stay. They didn't have that land for long. They had, of course, Spain took it back.
The two pictures on the right, I think these are more or less reenactment scenes. They actually have a reenactment kind of live-in history exhibit that you can go and visit in Florida. I don't know I'm just gonna say it is Fort Mose. I have a link in the back. I've seen mentioning of that before, and then these other two pictures show Western African villages in the 1800s. The one in the middle, that was my baby girl. As we was looking for him, she just had to be sure she contributed to the project, and that house was just too beautiful through her exact words, so it had to go in the show. But yeah, they dwelling habitats. I'm not going to try to even pronounce that name. Pia Kalakahia, old Abraham's Town, is cited as one of the 4 Black maroon communities of the region. It's eluded that old Abraham's Town was one of the largest settlements of free or freed Africans. I put freed and free as in some was born free, some ran away. This population solely being there behind Abraham as a leader and protector during the final stages of the Second Seminole Negro Wars, according to certain Union leaders. If you go back and you look at the actual manuscripts, they don't declare it an Indian War in Florida at this time. Whenever you study the Seminole Wars, specifically the Seminole Wars, when you look at majority of the literature, they make it all out clear that this was a Negro War. His home and village was burnt in an attack by Union troops, becoming one of the causes of Africans from the Florida region to surrender and begin to move westward. One of the things about Abraham, as I studied, one minute I would see that he was born a slave, the next minute wasn't. One thing's for certain, he was an interpreter, he was a warrior, a chief, and a diplomat. He said to be so honorable, even his enemies spoke respectful upon his name. And he did migrate to Oklahoma as well. Now I've used this quote before, but I just wanted to give an idea of how the roles of women at this time. This is where I was talking about matrilineal and matrifocal. I won't really go into that. Now I put this beaded jewelry up there because to the naked eye here, when you see the colors and you see the patterns, you could easily assume that's Native American, but that's not even in America. That's in Western Africa. Down here below, and like I said, I wanted to correlate off of things you have been broadcasting, Brother Kofi. So when you look at this carving, well, that's a West African carving that was found in St. Augustine, Florida in 1865. The woman depicted there, her name is Nora August. There's not a whole lot that we can pull from about her story. But if you look at the name, how we talked about being named after the days of the week, well, when you begin to see the shift to becoming more of an English dialect, you see them switch from days of the week to start naming themselves after the months. You'll see August, July. You'll see those names more often than any other months. Fort Negro. It was simple. It was a simple descriptive name, but it contained within it all the fear and dread of insurrection and uprising that haunted the sleep of slave owners throughout Georgia and the Carolinas, especially since a vicious and bloody slave rebellion in the Caribbean had given birth to the Republic of Haiti little more than a decade earlier. Tales of torture and slaughter of slaveholders on Santo Domingo was as well as the defeat of the Spanish, British, and French forces by African fighters had horrified Southern slave owners. Now, there was an African army just a few dozen miles from American plantations. For the erstwhile owners of the enslaved Africans, as well as those who still kept men and women in bondage, Negro Fort was the physical manifestation of a persistent nightmare of the enslaver's fear of a black insurrection, rebellion, and righteous vengeance. While some sources state that the blacks had occupied this area of Florida prior to the British building this fort, the year 1815 is when the British left this fort entirely in the hands of Africans, including weaponry, although it is noted that blacks had already established trading posts, farms, and noticeable amounts of livestock. Having this strategic location worried white plantation owners, slaveholders of the southern regions of the United States, in fear of constant runaway slaves towards this area and the ability to form a Negro army worthy of a threat to the entire system. July 27th, 1816 would be the fort's demise after a cannonball shot from a gunboat hit and landed on the fort's gunpowder stock, exploding and destroying the entire fort, leaving a debate of exactly how many were killed by this explosion. The argument is between 40 to 330 people, including women and children. This would be the precursor to the First Seminole War. Eventually, the patron siege of St. Augustine was broken after a party of Africans and Indians ambushed a supply convoy of U.S. Marines. The Spanish governor at St. Augustine later reported that while most American newspapers and later historians would highlight the actions as an Indian fight, it was actually an engagement largely fought by a black militia. Our parties of blacks, whom the patriots think are Indians because they wear the same clothing and go painted. And I picked this picture, and you'll see it often, but this kind of gives you an idea of how you might have seen Africans dressed at the time. You can kind of see them in British, French, Indian clothing. I don't really see anybody in what you would consider Native African garments, but it shows you that there was there was even a diversity amongst ourselves, and we have to be aware that the trade slave system itself, there was so many hands involved that you're going to naturally pick up different customs, and being traveled and shipped and migrated from so many different places, one could only assume that you would see things like this. I didn't finish this part of the article, but I read the entire article or the paper on this. And I talked to you about this, Kofi, already, about that African origins of Carolina rice cultivation. This is important to understand because one of the things that they talked about in the early stages of capitalism is that if you do not have resources in your country, build a colony and extort the resources from someone else. I can't remember exactly who quoted that idea, but that's what you see happen. This makes repetitive arguments debunking any myths or ideas that West Africans did not learn to cultivate rice independently without any outside resources, stating that more than 2,000 plus years of evidence has been manifested to document the idea of Western Africa having a long history of rice cultivation. It also touches on the importance and roles of the African women played to bring such valuable food resources into existence, males as well. I find this paper interesting on the aspect, one, it gives demonstration to the idea in capitalism and mercantilism that if a country does not have adequate resources, build a colony around a place that does and extract the wealth. That in turn can help make argument that not only was the mind, body, and labor of the African human extorted for capital, but its very lifeline and resources as well were taken for the benefit of an entirely different group of people.
And that's that where you were talking about the cultivating rice for over 2,000 years. That was I was talking about by Oswell, who was also one of the owners of Bunks Island, who actually were going and kidnapping our ancestors from Sierra Leone and Liberia specifically because they were master farmers of cultivating rice. They had been cultivating rice for 2,000 years. So an economic boom in Virginia and in not Virginia, but South North Carolina and Georgia because of those sea islands. They was already immune to that type of area because those swampy areas they was already immune to the certain type of diseases. They had already been cultivating rice for over 200 some years. So Oswell and I can't think of this other European, Lauren, I think that's his last name, actually came together in order to I'm gonna be quiet, man. Go ahead.
Go ahead. You good. Go ahead.
Damn, Sean, I tell you, but I'm just trying to get some people.
Next picture is for you and Sean, anyways. You know, to slide my little bit of a sense of humor in there.
Yeah, no, I was just trying to give people a little bit more clarity, far as what I was talking about with those two individuals. Yeah.
Kofi got man, Iwapuru, man. Kofi bad character, man. Boss, you going in, bro? Then Kofi breaking your, hey, he breaking your wisdom.
I'm sorry.
Oh, it's all good. It's all good. Now this picture here, as y'all can see, I didn't get to finish it. A big part of the reason why I went on ahead and slided in the presentation. This is in Brackettville in Texas, and it's a Seminole scout and his family. But the reason why I chose this picture is because not too long ago I heard Brother Sean and Kofi teaching each other about a pit bull, and I'm not a dog person, but that awfully looks like a pit to me. And that's another tradition that might be African American thing. I kind of giggled at it when I was putting it in here, but it was more specifically so you could see, look at the pattern of the housing, that you see it even leave Florida and move into Texas as well. The dog was just a little bit extra and just to add some giggles amongst brothers. And then it says removal of the Seminoles was apparently as much as an attempt to solve the Negro problem as it was to settle the Indians of Florida. I didn't get to finish going into that, but if you look at any of the records from that time, if you look into why Andrew Jackson was so adamant about moving into Florida, if you listen to what I believe it was General Jessup, if you listen to what he had to say, if you go and look at the actual documents, you'll see over and over and over again that they were stating this was a Negro war. Now this, I slid it there because that picture was there. So as I was rearranging things today, I went on ahead and slid this there. I hope y'all remember the name of Rosina Factor. I believe this is one of her children down on the bottom. I could be off, but I believe that was one of her children when she wound up leaving Florida. Now above correlates with the story I'm about to tell. April 25th, 1875, a battle between the U.S. and Comanche and Kiowa tribes in the middle of the Red River War took place. The above picture to the right depicts Lieutenant John Bullis being aided and protected by 3 black Seminole scouts, Pompey Factor, Isaac Payne, and John Ward. All 3 men would receive Medal of Honors. Oral tradition states that beyond just being called into duty, these men showed extra valor due to the fact that Bullis had recently produced a child with a black Seminole woman and taken her as his wife. It was part of the customs of the black Seminoles to protect their own. So when he fell in the midst of this battle, and I believe the story goes he fell, was being attacked, Ward and, no, let me get this right, Isaac Payne and Pompey Factor began firing back creating cover fire, and it was John Ward who went and picked him up and put him on his horse so they can escape. I
That's
may
fact.
have a couple of the names mixed off, but
That's
that's
that's right.
typically how the story goes.
That's right. That's right.
Um,
You're right. That's exactly what happened. You're right.
Sadly, Payne would be murdered New Year's Day shortly after. Ward would eventually earn his discharge and live out the rest of his life in retirement. Factor would seek refuge in Mexico, but later be found and returned back to Indian Territory. And according to most sources, not one received the benefits of being rewarded the Medal of Honor. Now back to trying to make things correlate, and you can see I did my best to find their pictures and line everybody up. Story goes, if I'm not mistaken, John Ward was arrested, but where they was, there was no prison, so they put him in a bullpen. John Ward walked around stomping his feet, and eventually a tornado came that night, destroyed the entire area. The only thing that was not damaged was John Ward's body. They said he was talking to himself, so legend goes that he called that storm on doing African spirituality practices. And was his brother Ben that just talked about the rain making? I wanted to add that story in just to build on that. Now, of course, I don't think the brother called a tornado upon, but it's just to say this is how our minds have worked, and this is how we build myths and legends.
Mm-hmm.
These are laws and acts that took place during the time that I think we should all be aware of, or if not, we should get into studying. The Negro Acts of 1740. These laws further enforced acts of slavery, creating restrictions in the ability of one to grow their own food, to assemble into groups, move unrestrictedly, earn money, and prohibited reading and writing. I didn't get to add it, but Kofi, we spoke about the Stonewall Rebellion and how a big part of the reason why they said the timing of that was taking place is because so many people were sick with malaria, yellow fever, and they talk about Africans being immune to malaria. Well, as time goes on, the only way you could be immune to malaria is if you was born with sickle cell. And there's just not enough evidence to say that every African that came over here was brought over here with sickle cell. What does make sense is there was a plant that was found in Southern America. If I'm not pronouncing it right, y'all have to forgive me, called quinine. I believe it's spelled Quin, maybe IE. And that has all the elements to fight malaria off. Now you got to remember that the Cimarron started in Panama. The name of it moved up. You got to remember the Portuguese involvement. The Portuguese would find this and study this plant, then come back to the Americas with it. So in my mind, and you can find it even in Florida, but in Florida, it's not necessarily a leaf-based plant. It's more of a quinine root. And they say there's a legend of a man who was feeling ill and stumbled upon a river. He drank some of the water there, and he was looking at it, and he could tell something wasn't right. He could see that the bark was bleeding into the water. But he began to notice after he drank the water of that river or stream, his illnesses started to fade away. And then that's when Southeastern American natives began to use that same plant to fight different forms of illness. So the fact that they said blacks could no longer grow their own food, we have to also understand that one of the silent waves of forming a slave revolt was, if we grew the food and we had knowledge of foods, then why not poison the master? So you've seen a lot of slaves try to poison their master in order to gain freedom. Some would even go as far as to poison themselves. But I think the knowledge of plants, and there's also, if I'm not mistaken, a brother named Caesar That's the only name they gave him. Around this time frame, maybe 1740, if I'm not mistaken, he earned his freedom from his knowledge of plants to fight snake poisoning bites. That he was so good with plants that he wound up earning his freedom to give away his remedy. The Treaty of New York in 1790. This took place in New York at the time the nation's capital between both the Creek and Seminole Nation tribes and Henry Knox. This treaty would leave the tribes giving up not just the land that they hunted on, as the U.S. tried to convert the tribes to agricultural practices, but also to reach an agreement that they would allow the U.S. to have access to trade in Florida. It also stipulated that the Creek tribes, in particular, would return any runaway slaves or Negro slaves they had or found under the jurisdiction. Being part of an extended collection of treaties, the Non-Intercourse Act of 1790, 1793, 96, 1802, and 1834, pertaining land rights and commerce, for example, the Treaty of 1796. Now, what I find interesting about this is you have the Creek Nation go up there. There's no mentioning of a Seminole group at this time. And you see, one of the main things to this contract was the capturing of Negro slaves. I think this is where they start to establish the idea of calling themselves Seminoles. At least kicking the idea and theorizing around it. The Treaty of Ghent, 1815. While the primary focus of this treaty was to reach a status quo antebellum, a state of existence before the war, it documents that Britain would turn over all prisoners and ships to the U.S., including free blacks. However, Britain instead never turned over blacks to the U.S., but would later, in the year 1826, pay the U.S. would pay $1.2 million for these blacks. One thing I haven't mentioned, the relationship between blacks and British and blacks in Spain. In Southern America, when you had the Cimarrones, they was escaping Spanish powers. As the British came in, how I mentioned Walter Raleigh and Francis Drake, they sided with the British at the moment to escape Spanish colonial powers. They even went to war. I forget the brother's name, but he was so vicious in his attack that the legend goes that he goes into a Spanish territory with the decapitated head of some of the people he was fighting. And I believe in the Taínos language, Cimarrones mean arrows. They talk about, if it wasn't Walter Raleigh, y'all have to forgive me, there was another explorer there. They talk about how while he was in the Panama region, he went up into a mountain to where he could see both the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean at the same time. Very, very rarely, if you're looking in modern day history books, will they tell you that's where the Cimarrones love to be, that they love of nature and their kindness towards the British at the time brought them to their hideout, as they both formed together to come up with a plan to rob the Spanish of one of their gold ships. And they got away with a lot of gold and a lot of silver. These Cimarrones, instead of asking for any of the gold or the silver, they only asked for the iron. To me, that goes along with the idea of semi meaning short knife, either short spear or arrow. But I can't prove that. That's just something when I got it in my head. Why would they only take the iron? The only thing I could think of is them forming more weapons to protect themselves, thinking there was no use for gold at the time. The Treaty of Nicole's Outpost, 1815. Not labeled under this until 1950, this treaty between British and Native American peoples that would establish 2 forts in Spanish Florida, one being Negro Fort, and the key reason why the Union Jack was flying over this fort. That's the British flag. Also opens debate to saying the thesis that the first actual acknowledgement of a new group, the Seminoles, emerged in 1815. And now this is right before you start seeing documentation of a Seminole War. As soon as they got a fort, now all of a sudden you got Seminole War. The Treaty of Moultrie Creek, 1823. I should have turned this blue because I took this directly from Wikipedia. I apologize about that. And normally I would have wrote my own stuff, but it was worded so well, I didn't see a point in actually trying to change it because it just goes along. It's well suited and spoken. Under the Treaty of Moultrie Creek, the United States government was obligated to protect the Seminoles as long as they remained peaceful and law-abiding. The government was supposed to distribute farm implements, cattle, and hogs to the Seminoles, compensate them for their travels and losses involved in relocating to the reservation, and provide rations for a year until the Seminoles could plant and harvest new crops. The government was also supposed to pay the tribe $5,000 a year for 20 years and provide an interpreter, a school, and a blacksmith for the same 20 years. In turn, the Seminoles had to allow roads to be built across this reservation and had to apprehend any runaway slaves or fugitives and return them back to the United States jurisdiction. If you look at any map where this took place, you'll see it be covering where you've seen a lot of those all black towns or maroon villages in Florida. And I found it, very intriguing that one of the things it says is you have to capture black slaves. In order to get this contract, you have to capture black slaves. The Compensation Act of 1861 was signed into law August 6, 1861, giving the Union permission under the law to take away weapons from any citizen who may have intended to rebel. This also allowed them to compensate slaves from the South. The Compensation Act of 1862, an expansion of the previous law, this time adding the right to seize personal property, which included slaves from the South. Don't let them drink it. They was doing it the first time as well. The slaves were to be forfeited to the Union Army. Important note to think on this is this, that should have been imported. I got it right. These slaves were to be forfeited to the Union Army. So they was handed over to the Army to be in the Army. But an important note to think on this is that this did not give African-American males the right to be combat soldiers. Instead, they were to be used as laborers, scouts, and other subservient level tasks. See the Militia Acts. Sources do state, however, this was a precursor to the Emancipation Proclamation. One of the things they would use us for is cooks, and they started seeing that in the South. They would see how the South was using blacks to dig, trenches, to do the laundry, to carry goods, to run errands. It wasn't using them for combat yet, but they was using them to do a lot of the manual labor things that it takes to maintain an army. So the Union just turned right back around, implemented it, and to hurt them for them having more slaves, they just extorted them and took them. Homestead Act of 1862 opened over 270 million acres of land free to any citizen, including immigrants. Women, however, would not specify blacks until a later date. This act was in the opposition of Southern slaveholders who sought to purchase mass quantity of land and creating a free ideology approach towards farming for citizens. This law will also have a later effect on Oklahoma's land run. The Militia Act of 1862. This gave permission to African Americans to join the army, rather by free will or by force, while appearing to be a step forward towards the liberation of our people and the rightful respect as man, not to be seen as human property. We must be aware that the consensus was to use blacks once again as laborers, digging ditches, canals, cooks, laundry service, to clean camps, etc., and all other laborers that would benefit the Union, while keeping the war itself a white man's war, and the idea of valor, bravery strictly limited to only them. Same year, you have the Morrill Land Grant Acts. This gave each state federal aid to establish colleges, although at the time it was passed, it excluded Confederate states. What it allowed was agricultural training, science, military tactics, and other forms of education or training were to be made available for each state. It would be expanded in 1890 and include the southern states, and it also declared that race should not and could not be used to discriminate against any student, and was the birth of what we call historical black colleges. Right after that, we got the Emancipation Proclamation. I'm pretty sure many know what that is, so I won't waste any time. Sherman's Special Field Order 15, 1865. With this contract, the birth of the saying, 40 acres and a mule, is birth. The original inception of the contract was proposed by Sherman and Garrison Frazier, and a group of blacks ranging from active and retired military, preachers, etc., and decided that they wanted rights to land. They wanted school. They wanted to be educated. This is where I'm going to introduce one video. It's not that long, but I want y'all to look at it and really, really try to analyze what you see, because to me, I see something much deeper that I'll speak about afterwards. Let's see how this works.
Their acreages all over the South, and they want the people who are then living there removed.
The president ordered that Confederate lands seized by Union troops during the war be returned to the planters, including land confiscated under General Sherman's Field Order 15. In Georgia, the assistant commissioner of the Freedmen's Bureau refused to give planters back their land. Johnson fired him and replaced him with someone who would. In Washington, the head of the Bureau, General O. Howard, sympathized with the freedmen and resisted the president's decree for as long as he could. Finally, in October, Howard set out for the black settlement at Edisto Island off the coast of South Carolina. His orders from President Johnson were to effect an agreement mutually satisfactory to the freedmen and the landowners. Behind the bureaucratic language, Johnson's directive was clear.
General Howard has to tell these former slaves that the land that they thought had been given to them by the federal government now is going to be given back to the former owners. And if they want to remain there, they're going to have to sign labor contracts to work as laborers on these plantations. These people believe that they have a right to this land. To them, this is a violation, a deep betrayal of the promises that the government made to them. They are not willing to just take this lying down.
I'd endeavored to explain the wishes of the president, and with one voice they cried, "No, no." In the noise and confusion, a sweet-voiced Negro woman began the hymn, "Nobody knows the trouble I feel Nobody knows but Jesus.
Many had been following events in Washington and insisted they would wait and see what Congress had to say. Others petitioned Howard in writing. Wrote one man, "You ask us to forgive the landowners of our island. The man who tied me to a tree and gave me 39 lashes, who stripped and flogged my mother and my sister, and will not let me stay in his empty hut, except I will do his planting and be satisfied with his price. That man I cannot well forgive." In January 1866, a large contingent of black soldiers arrived at St. Catherine's with orders to restore the land to Jacob Waldberg. Campbell's militia had kept whites off the island, but this was something different.
Tunis Campbell believed that the people had to take things into their own hands sometimes, but African American freed men are not going to fire on African American soldiers. No.
The experiment in independence at St. Catherine's was over. A determined Tunis Campbell headed for the Georgia mainland.
Let me get back to the show.
Let me ask you a question real quick. So did that video say that basically the black soldiers went to go get the freedmen off the land?
Yeah, and you went exactly to what I analyzed myself. Now they was fighting, they would send troops in. The actual documentary itself, I believe PBS put it out. I think it's called Reconstruction, the Second Civil War, if I'm not mistaken. I own a copy of it. I happened to just find that one day as I was researching the Sherman Special Field Order, trying to find something to talk towards it, and bring to light the 40 acres and a mule. But yeah, they fought to get everybody out of that area for a while. And I believe it goes from Carolina to Florida up against the rice coast, where you would see a lot of the rice at, and 30 miles backwards from the shorelines is where everybody was at. Now, I believe the only blacks there were ex-military, but you still got to think that's a lot of land. That was a lot of people involved. And like you said, they sent blacks in there. To me, the first thing my mind analyzed is that's where they learned to turn one against the other, and seeing that, okay, that's the tool. If we divide them amongst themselves, that's how we can win. Because up until that point, every time they battled against us, we would walk away undefeated. So much so that the Seminole tribe goes around saying to this day that they the only undefeated group in the Americas. But they won't mention that the only reason they undefeated is why a lot of those Creeks was battling. It was the African warriors at their side telling them not to give up. It was the African soldiers fighting to the death, more vicious than anyone. So they won't mention that. Just like they won't sit back and adhere to the fact that they've been offered money that they will not give to the Black Seminoles. A lot of us don't realize that the Seminoles own the Hard Rock casinos. So they making millions of billions of dollars. And a lot of these families are entitled to the benefits of that. But they won't even mention you in their history.
Oh, you talking about the Seminoles? Won't mention the Black Seminoles?
Yeah.
No, yeah, it won't. Yeah, exactly.
They won't.
That's right. That's why I'm saying I don't understand why they claiming these things. If you claiming all this, why you not reaping the benefits of these civilized tribes, these 5 civilized tribe names that keep popping up. Why you not reaping none of the benefits? Why you don't have any of these lands? Why you're not being tax exempt from so many different things? Why you not owning any casinos and involved in some of these casinos and some of these other things that they giving them if you are part of these so-called tribes? You know, they shunning you.
Yeah. And I won't deny that they did give some of the benefits out to freedmen. But if you read into the story of what it took to get it, I mean, it's beyond disrespectful, because they was offered so much money, and it was almost, when you actually look at the story, it upsets me on this aspect. And I don't have no hatred towards any set group. I don't think that way. I just hate ignorant. I almost started cussing. I just hate ignorance within itself, but I don't have it in me to be racist. I don't have enough time to think about other groups of people to even become one. What upsets me is you see them trying to play each other and then cry victim. You can't be involved in the slave trade, then get told you're wrong. For example, when the 5 tribes fought with the Confederacy, when they find out that the Union won and they cancel a lot of the treaties that they had, stop crying victim for your own actions, because these same people will turn around with no remorse and point at every single flaw in the Black community and then say that's why they don't help us. They don't help us because of what they see on TV. They don't help us because we on drugs, we fight each other, we thugs, we strippers. But when you look inside these history books, who taught us to be thugs? How many have ever took the time to realize thug don't even belong to us? That's a Hindu Indian culture, the thuggies. That's where that word comes from. But let me keep going because I don't want to hold the people all night. The Civil Rights Act of 1866, written by Lyman Trumbull. This act prohibited discrimination in any state based off race, giving African Americans extended support of their recent citizenship that was so constantly denied, voting, the right to enter public places, etc. This was built off the Equal Protection Clause in 13th and 14th, 15th Amendments. The Civil Rights Act of 1870, Enforcement Acts of 1870 and 1871, also known as the Ku Klux Klan Act. This prohibited public officials from discriminating against voting and gave the president the power to enforce martial law if bribes, discrimination, or anything of the likeness took place to prevent any race, and particularly Blacks, from voting. All 3 acts are synonymous. I don't know how cyanides came across, but all 3 acts are synonymous in their own right. The Civil Rights Act of 1875 was designed by President Grant, but never actually enforced, according to John Hope Franklin. Let me get that out the way. However, this would be the act that was built upon in 1957, giving birth to the more commonly known civil rights movement of the 1960s. Plessy versus Ferguson, passed in 1896. From the Supreme Court, making it legal for segregation, aka we call it Jim Crow. This law would be fought against by many in Oklahoma and across the United States. Charles Houston would be known as one of the strongest fighters against Jim Crow by means of law, court cases, the Lewis versus Gaines, which a Black male was denied his right into Missouri University. Houston fought that. And by the fact that they say separate but equal, Houston came up with the brilliant idea to say, hey, if Missouri University is denying him his right to go to law school, and by the law, by the Supreme Court and federal agencies, that we are supposed to be separate but equal, then you guys have to cough up all the money to build an equal establishment Now, y'all can waste that money, or you can just allow this young man to go to school. In theory, it sounds good. I think we should have kept it separate but equal, personally. I mean, just look at where we at now, but I don't want to denounce any man's hard work towards trying to do what they felt was best to get us liberated as well. So a part of me understands it, but looking at the after effect, I wish he would have just said, build an equal school. That way we could have studied these laws on our own. Another case that he fought was, oh, I think I made a mistake. It shouldn't be gangs. But there was a case in Oklahoma where a young boy was, I want to say he was electrocuted, maybe 13, 14 years old. They held him as guilty, and there was nothing they could really do about it, no matter what. They had their paws on him, so they wasn't going to let him go. But Charles Houston and a few others at least got in and got it through the courts to where at this point we can start serving as jurors in these court cases and try to start balancing these stories out. I wish I could have got a better picture. This is the Morrell Land Axe. The stars, you can't really see it, but all the stars indicate the 18 historical Black colleges that was being established off of those land acts. Okay, now we're getting into Oklahoma. The all Black towns of Oklahoma, according to Oklahoma Historical Society, the all Black towns of Oklahoma, African Americans who settled in Oklahoma established more than 50 identifiable all Black towns between the end of the Civil War in 1920. This number is unparalleled in any other region of the United States. Most towns were developed in Indian Territory by freedmen, former slaves of the 5 tribes. Others were established as a result of the land openings beginning in 1889. In these towns, African Americans lived relatively free from prejudice and violence found in many communities. Today, 13 historical all Black towns still exist. Yeah, I got my mouse. Y'all see this word right here? Cimarron. Now, if it's an all Black town and Cimarron means Seminole, why is there an all Black town called Cimarron? That was the first thing that struck me as odd about this map. Later in time, you'll see them shift this name, totally denounce Cimarron being here, and they'll put it in the panhandle. And here's a little snippet here I'm gonna go to.
Discover your family history.
Okay, this one is from the National Geographic, if y'all can hear me.
My grandparents.
And Oklahoma is a unique space in terms of the number of African American towns that were established. Some suggest upwards of 50 African American towns between 1924 and 1928. Reverend S.S. Jones was going around documenting this sort of self-determined, vibrant African American communities. You see the African American educators, doctors, lawyers, landowners, oil barons. And I think that's what's so remarkable about this footage, to think that individuals, how many years out of slavery, are now owning oil wells that are producing 2,000 barrels a day. Is that not the ultimate American dream? Is that not the ultimate American story? It flies in the face of what I think some people consider part of African American history and culture. And I think that that was one of the things that Oklahoma and what S.S. Jones is really kind of showing, is that African American history and culture is not a monolith. And in a way, it became kind of like a marketing tool to encourage individuals to migrate, to move there, that this is a place where you can live, you can thrive, and peacefully reside. There were still palpable racial tensions. There are lynchings, there's Jim Crow segregation, there's all of these things, and you still have an African American community, or many communities, that really speak to the fortitude and resilience of Black people in this country.
I don't know if there's a full documentary to this. I'm gonna assume it is. I just haven't been able to find it. I wasn't really looking for any of that. I just wanted to see if there was anything available to kind of share out here. I don't know what I did with the show, Kofi. I done messed up again. Here's another one. This one talks more specifically about a certain town. Yeah.
The all-black town of Rentisville, Oklahoma, was founded in 1903 and almost crumbled away during the Depression when many families left and local businesses could no longer survive. But this small community has held together to this day.
I don't ever want to say I was born and raised somewhere that town doesn't exist anymore. That would be just the saddest thing ever for me to tell someone.
Some young people are now coming back. Spencer Nero
it ain't all farmland here
adjacent
either.
to his father's ranch
We got
after
cities.
graduating from college.
My dad was, born and raised right here on this same place that I was, and his dad, same thing.
Rentisville is one of 13 surviving all-black towns in Oklahoma. After the Civil War and the abolition of slavery, many African Americans moved to new territories in the West where they could acquire land and form their own communities. At the end of the 19th century, Oklahoma had more all-black towns than any other state, and there was a movement to make it an all-black state.
But it was actually a Kansas politician that started this whole idea of trying to recruit African Americans.
I've seen this woman before, and out of her own mouth, she had no awareness of it, and I believe she's from Oklahoma. But I think she was at Washington, D.C. with her mother watching a play, the actual stage play, Oklahoma. And it had a small, like I said, you'll see little small, maybe 1-2 sentences, how Oklahoma was almost a black state. Her seeing that and being from Oklahoma, she couldn't believe it. And that's what led her to start doing her research. I'm going to keep it going, but it's not like this has been her life's work to get this out.
To move to Oklahoma in hopes of creating possibly an all-black state where there would be no segregation and where African Americans could govern themselves.
Journalist and filmmaker Carrie Barber spearheaded a project named Struggle and Hope, a series of web videos and a feature-length documentary about the history of all-black towns in her native state. She spoke to us via Skype.
I had grown up in Oklahoma and I had never heard this story before and was very surprised, so I began researching it.
The documentary is focused on efforts to save the remaining all-black towns in Oklahoma, some of them with populations of no more than 25 people. Barber says her goal is to raise awareness about an important part of U.S. history that is not taught in schools.
There's so much that hasn't been told. There's so many stories that were left out. And really, when we tell these stories, it makes us a richer country, and it makes us appreciate and understand each other better.
A lot of rich history there, and once it's gone, it's gone. Whenever that book is closed, you can't reopen it. And so I think for me is trying to keep that book, open to where others can see it.
The purpose of the Struggle and Hope project is to inspire others to create books and movies that explore all of the rich and diverse parts of U.S. history. Zlatica Hoke, VOA News, Washington.
A Black History in Oklahoma introduces Edward P. McCabe by using a quote from Carter G. Woodson. While many were moved by the chance to amass fabulous sums, they all sighed with relief at the thought that they could at least go to a country where they could educate their children, protect their families, free from insults, and enjoy the fruits of their labor. Now, the actual statement applies to Blacks' migrations towards northern states. It still fits the description and the dreams and ambitions of many of the Blacks who migrated to Oklahoma prior to statehood, or those who recently found themselves as freedmen with the desire to achieve the famous natural right to life, liberty, and property. I will quote Woodson again as the portion of the presentation progresses, hopefully highlighting some of the very conversations that took place from the 19th century to the present date. The Blacks' response to all varied. In 1869 and 1870, there was a series of meetings which resulted in petitions demanding full citizenship and equal property rights. Violence was frequently met with violence, although there is evidence that many Blacks first sought legal ways to stop these attacks. At this time, you got to remember, we just came underneath the stronghold of the native tribes here, and they wasn't trying to relinquish that at first. Completely underestimated and outnumbered, swiftly coming to the reality of their rights being even more neglected, African Americans still managed to make history in this region, establishing in the midst of such pains, triumphs that simply cannot be ignored. From 1865 to 1889, the race becomes an extremely burdensome issue in Indian territory. Tribes who sided with the Confederates, realizing their treaties have become null and void, began to further their ideas of race superiority over Blacks. Many once told that they had to free their slaves once and give them citizenship under their government, began to distance themselves even further from African Americans. At one point, not even money offered by the federal government was enough to convince the Chickasaw or Choctaw to consider Africans as members and grant them their rights. After 1877, Blacks in uncountable amounts began to enter the territory. This led to even more violence. And thinking that the Negro would prove disloyal to the United States, however, the white man showed that he did not understand the race. The Negroes of this country love the native soil and will readily die if necessary to defend it. However, they did not love the reactionaries who during the last 50 years of their control of federal government have failed to live up to their oath and carry out the Constitution of the United States, which guarantees the Negroes the enjoyment of every right, immunity, and privilege found in the most liberal democracy on earth. The Negroes will continue to be loyal to their country with the hope that the degraded elements in control may sufficiently civilize to abandon medieval methods for government based on liberty, equality, and fraternity, as the principle is worth fighting for, and the struggle for it must not be hopeless in the view and the interest occasionally shown in man far down. The Negroes would permit their disposition to sour. They forgot their wrongs and offered themselves to fight for the battle of humanity. I was still building at this point. Let me see. This article here is extremely long. I'll give you a preview of it. This was in the New York Times, April 9th, 1891. It's centered around Edward P. McCabe and his idea to make this an all-Black state. I won't read this because it's pretty lengthy. However, it's in the chat, and I'm gonna try to find a way to share this entire presentation with Kofi, because there's a lot of sources that I have in here. I will read this article though, because it's a strictly all-Black article. I believe it was out of Indiana. Took me a while to figure out how to find these things and navigate my way through it. But this was talking about Oklahoma becoming an all-Black state. It says, the more we think about this subject, the more we are convinced that it is not only impossible, but that it would be an easy matter for the colored people to make Oklahoma and Indian Territory a state under their control and management, where the opportunities and advantage of any other American would be theirs. that it was originally intended that these tracts of land to be held for exclusive use of colored people and Indians is shown by the language of the treaty by which this land was required. Freedmen and friendly Indians is the term used describing those to whom the land was to be held for allotment. But as years went by, the eye of avaricious Caucasians fell on these woodlands and fertile prairies. So the freedmen and friendly Indians were interpreted to mean friendly Indians and their freedmen. There are not of those. There's not enough of these to occupy the vast tract. So it's so hard to pull this up. So a large number of these were colored, and all have proven their claims and titles to have there, but they shall not come not. But he shall come not. And there will be much complaint by the people who will not listen to reason, but will blindly follow those for their own gains. And a hunger shall increase because the man that despoil them, and they should not know. Oh, there was more to it. Look, that wasn't even the right one. That's why I don't like this thing. My bad, y'all. I was thinking that sound off. It says it only requires a desire on the part of this number. It does not require much foresight to see the numerous opportunities that will be before the colored young man or woman in such a community. We would believe that under the same circumstances, any other race would gladly embrace such an opportunity to promote their mutual interests. Neely Factor was one of the Indian Territory's first black marshals, known to have always captured his suspect. He would work alone at times in small posses. He would work alone at times in small posses or in small posses. Black history pertaining lawmen in this region is almost certainly to be mentioned right after Bass Reeves. Colin Factor and Malaya Factor, the husband of Eva Factor, together they would have six, or the son of Colin Factor and Malaya Factor, and the husband to Eva Factor. Together they would have 6 children in Cribbs, Oklahoma. And their oldest son, Oscar, would one day be the father of Thelma Factor, my grandmother. This picture here was taken as they was headed out on a hunt. It says U.S. Marshal in Indian Territory. Factor said we were on our way to Deadman's Crossing when we had the picture made near Cold Creek. We captured 1 murderer, 2 horse thieves, and just a little later, another murderer and a white man who was later convicted and sent to the penitentiary. Okay, I apologize, y'all. I had to check on my children. From 1865 to 1889, race becomes an extremely, let me see. I think I put this in there already. Yeah. In 1890, at least 85 blacks were lynched in America. Mostly in the South, the Mississippi Plan developed at the 1890 Mississippi State Constitutional Convention and laid the foundation for the disfranchisement of Black Southerners voters through the imposition of poll tax, literacy measures, and other qualification schemes. It swept through the South. And in this, a lot of what you'll see right here is speaking towards, you see the same thing taking place amongst the Indians. They start reneging on contracts, stalling on contracts. I'm not going to get into it. I'm going to try to speed up and get past some of this stuff and get into towards the end. I will read this statement down here because I think it's worthy of reading. I'll skip the middle part. It says, these freedmen are by far the most intelligent and self-reliant of any of their race that I have come under, that has come under my observation. And where they too have a fair chance in life would solve the problem of their capacity for self-government. They have been waiting patiently the action of the government for the actions of the government in their behalf, and have at last become uneasy and dissatisfied. They say you, as our agent, told us that the government would take care of us and give us homes if the Indians did not adopt us. We have waited for months, and your promises are unfulfilled. The Indians tell us the government will give them money and compel us to live among them. If this be true, then tell us. The unsettled condition of these freedmen had caused more or less trouble, and in which a quite number of them have been killed. And in my judgment, nothing but prompt action of part of the government will prevent serious difficulties and complications. Edward P. McCabe. In March of 1890, McCabe had a meeting with President Harrison, in which Harrison asked, why would blacks want to settle a state in Oklahoma, opposed to remaining in the South East region of the United States? McCabe answered, we desire to get away from the associations that cluster about us in the southern states. We wish to remove from the disgraceful surroundings that disregarded my people, and in the new territory in Oklahoma, show people of the United States and of the world that we are not only loyal citizens, but we are capable of advancement, and that we can be an honor to those who owned us as chattels, but disavowed us as sons and daughters. We are willing to abide by that decision, but a new country on new lands with a climate suited to our race. We desire to show that we are men and women capable of self-government and loyal enough to add strength to the government. This is one of the first big all-black towns in Oklahoma. I'll play this video. It's not that long. I'm getting towards the end though, y'all.
Say, have you heard the story of a little colored town way over in the nation on such lovely sloping ground, with as pretty little houses as you ever chanced to meet, with not a thing but colored folks a-standing in the streets? Oh, 'tis a pretty country, and the Negroes own it too, with not a single white man here to tell us what to do.
Boley is a historical black town, starting with the slaves of the Indians, the Creek freedmen, who were all black. And this area was settled by blacks, and it was predominantly black. Boley was named after a white man.
Non-black J.B. Boley was an official of the Fort Smith and Western Railroad that ran through the town site.
That's what started the town, was the fact that the railroad came through here. And the old steam engines had to have water every 6 miles. And when it left Castle, 6 miles to the east of us, the next stop would have been 6 miles. The people that worked the railroad thought, well, can black folks govern themselves?
The black towns of Oklahoma grew out of necessity. After the Civil War, former slaves belonging to the 5 civilized tribes settled together for mutual protection and economic security.
Really, the town was really built up of the backbone of the farmers.
Boley was supported by an agricultural economy. The cash crop around Boley was cotton, and you had farming was a big thing. We had families with 10, 11, 12 kids to help raise the crops.
This new township of Boley was formally declared on September 22nd, 1904, by way of an approved application granted to the 200 citizens of Boley, Indian Territory.
Boley was kind of the seat of the black community. Boley once boasted of having almost everything any other big town has.
In the years 1905 and 1906, people came to Boley by the train loads. In some instances, 8 and 10 families would alight from the same train. Luggage would fill the depot platform and would be piled 6 and 7 feet high.
We have a Boley Chamber of Commerce that put on a rodeo each year, and that rodeo brings in upwards of 50,000 people on any one given weekend.
The first rodeo we had was back in the 30s.
So we are the biggest black rodeo in the United States. Now, there are black rodeos in Oklahoma City, Houston, and LA and everything, but see, it's not a black town. You know, it's a black rodeo, but it's not a black town. We're the biggest black town rodeo in the United States.
Boley was quite a thriving community when I was growing up. The streets were full and every lot had a business on it at that time.
You couldn't tell Saturday from Monday. It's just as many people on the streets on the Saturday as it was on a Monday, every day like that. I just can't believe it.
When the bottom fell out of cotton, then people had to seek another source of income.
And many of the farmers had to leave the farms to go to the big towns to make a living.
World War II, a lot of the people migrated to the East Coast, West Coast, the war effort plants in Chicago and Detroit, and they went away.
Boley never did recover from that.
The population went as high as they thought, somewhere around 7,000 people between 1910 and 1940. The population now is approximately 500 people.
Oh, woman, it ain't none of my business. But you know it sure ain't right.
And I will tell that fellow, whoever he may be, if you don't think we are colored, just you come here and see. Get on the Fort Smith and Western. That train will bring you here. Take any of the coaches. You have no cause for fear. Here a Negro makes your dresses and a Negro makes your pants and hands your mail out if you'll give him half a chance.
Y'all can see what that says right there. I can't verify that it was the largest in the world, but at the time that was the rhetoric around it. The chariot that rocked and rolled around the world. Uncle Wallace Willis and Aunt Minerva, a married couple owned by Choctaw Britt Willis, possibly from Mississippi, but more scholars place the story being settled in or near Hugo, Oklahoma. Willis would be rented out to work in Spencer Academy, an all-boy Choctaw school, and it is there where he met a Presbyterian Reverend, Alexander Reed, who heard him sing songs, heard the couple sing songs. Reed would later visit in 1871 a Feast Jubilee concert in Newark, New Jersey. There, Reed would submit the songs he heard from Willis in paper form. The songs would be recorded later in 1909. The songs composed by Uncle Willis became well-known spirituals: Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, Roll Jordan Roll, Steal Away Jesus, I'm Rolling, The Angels Are Coming are among the most popular and best loved. That was by the Oklahoma Historical Society. Louis Armstrong, Paul Robeson, Sam Cooke, Etta James would be some of the many celebrities who would later record the song as well. In 2011, a bill passed to make Sweet Low Oklahoma's state gospel song. This is a song to remember our ancestors. This is the Gullah Seminole people. Professor Lorenzo Turner, 1890-1972, a linguist and founder of the African Studies program at Fisk University, known as the father of Gullah studies, was determined to prove that the Gullah language and African linguistics had African linguistic origins, not solely broken English dialects. He traveled the eastern coast of the United States, Georgia, Louisiana, the Carolinas, Brazil, Sierra Leone, and other parts of Africa as well, studying the languages, and not only of Africa, but Portuguese and Creole as well, recording his findings and documenting his research. He published the books, Africanism, the Gullah Dialect, Anti-Slavery Settlement in America, Literature Prior to 1865, and numerous journals and audio recordings. One of these recordings of a woman named Amelia S. Dolly, born 1880, lived through 1880 to 1955, singing a song in 1931, would 60 years later be the missing piece to reconnecting Gullah people to their African Mende family across the sea. Turner also showed expressions of grammatical number such as day, boy, dem, the boys, and a serial verb construction, ko, kami, home, come carry me home, which have English parallels, but the Gullah speakers have constructions more. This was him recording it. This is the granddaughter of the woman he was actually recording. This is a picture of the Mende people over there singing it. This is from the Smithsonian, this picture right here. There's a little video trailer to the actual documentary. It's only a minute. I'm almost done. I think I got like maybe 3 more slides left, and those are all real short.
And as I began to play the recording, to my astonishment, these women began to sing along.
I think the most fascinating thing I had ever found was a 5-line song in the Mende language that had been preserved by a Gullah family in coastal Georgia.
Another possible Gullah connection to rituals, John Horace and his migration from Florida and his travels through Oklahoma, along with his family and other Black Seminoles, would find themselves in Mexico and be the founder of another Cimarron settlement, Nacimiento de los Negros. In time, the people here would become identified as Muskogees or Negros Muskogees, descendants of the Black Seminoles. Kayape, a Negro spiritual song sung at funerals, is kept by women. Lyrics feature the sense of loss, of farewell to the dead, led by the oldest women, the group sings while hand clapping in a case of funeral performances, moving in a circle around the dead body. They still sing this song as long as the dead is Negrito, but if it's in a Mexican, they do not sing it. And you'll see the women dressed in African garments. And like I said, it's only for Black people down there. I want to do some more into this. I found this morning. I don't even know how I found it, but I found it interesting because it completely lines up with the one you've seen just previously. Chief Alfred C. Sam. Born in Ghana in 1880, Alfred Sam would one day find his way to Oklahoma and create a Back to Africa movement. It is said he made trade deals with coffee, mahogany, and cocoa from Africa to the States. During this time, the opportunity to buy a ship was presented. By 1910 through 1913, he was in Oklahoma promoting the idea that for $25, Blacks could purchase stock in Akeem Trading Company and live in an area purchased by Sam in West Africa. Facing mixed reviews, some of him seen him as a hero figure and sold land to invest with him. Some seen this as a scheme and warned not to participate. Sam, however, continued to promote his plans via newspapers and public speeches, and his opposers did the same. Although Sam did make it good on his word, purchasing a boat and setting arrangements to take his people back to Africa. An estimated 500 or more African Americans gathered together in 1914 down in Galveston, Texas, with high hopes of a new life and opportunity in the Gold Coast of Africa. The SS Liberia was set to leave on June 14th, 1914, but sabotaged and likely bombarded with legal fees and unexpected expenses and delayed departure. The SS Liberia did not depart until August. This cost not only money collected, but all the saved foods and resources for the journey. That did not stop the overall mission to reach the Gold Coast. While a handful of people eventually did return to Oklahoma with complaints, we must remember that over 500 departed there, that remained there. It's said that Sam sold the ship to regain financial loss and retired in Ghana after returning to the cocoa trade business and stayed there till he died. Some say that he sold his ship and abandoned the people and came back to New York. But more stories say that he stayed over there than saying he was reported back in New York. Roscoe Dunjee was born to John and Lydia Ann Dunjee, June 21st, 1883, in Harpers Ferry, Virginia. John Dunjee, a preacher, hard worker, and lover of books, would move his family to Oklahoma in 1892, working hard over the next 10 years of his life. John Dunjee worked hard growing and selling vegetables to support his family until the day he died, leaving behind a small home, but an extensive library of rare books, said to have been over 1,500 books in all. Roscoe purchased a small printing company and became an editor, and is stated to have little education prior to his enrollment of the Colored Agriculture Normal University, later known as Langston. However, he became a well-known for his newspaper, The Black Dispatch. From this magazine, Dunjee would promote Black economic power, civil rights, and all positive needed ideologies for the African American woman and man and child. To Dunjee, the League was not only designed to encourage Black business, but to also unite the entire race. He was also a highly respected member of the NAACP, and it's said that his efforts promoted and secured the networking of the NAACP, establishing headquarters in each state to secure more resources and power to aid African Americans in time of need. A member of Booker T. Washington's National Negro Business League, he would work in law cases against segregation, gained Black jurors, and helped in the Ada Lewis, Sybil Fisher, and George McLaurin's cases allowing those two to be the first blacks submitted into Oklahoma University. Excelsior Library, Guthrie, Oklahoma, homed Judith Ann Carter, who opened Oklahoma's first public library, Excelsior, after her husband was denied access to Carnegie Library in Guthrie. A school teacher, and also headed the library for 11 years until she became a full-time Latin teacher at Favors High School. She worked to gain scholarships for orphaned African-American girls. She also worked for the state training school for Negro boys in Boley, the Industrial Institute for the Deaf and Blind Orphans of the Colored Race. And although she retired from teaching in 1936, she remained active in all ways possible until her death in February 16, 1948. And that is it. These are all the books that I actually bought and owned that I quoted from. I don't know why it's going backwards. And these are the rest of the sources, and that was that. I hope I wasn't too long for everybody.
Too
late for that. It's too late to say.
You said something, Sean. I thought you would have jumped in a long time ago.
No, man. No, I was trying to keep Kofi quiet. See, while you was presenting, I was handling Kofi.
Oh. You gotta hit stop sharing too.
Yeah, please hit the stop sharing. Please.
Fine. Well.
But he liked me.
Good job, bro. I'm saying it while we live and while people can hear why it's recorded. Good job on your first presentation, bro. Even though I know you was nervous and all of that, Vyasa, just hit the stop sharing button right there, that little blue button right there. Just hit that, bang. Now hide your camera because we don't want to see your vampire face.
I got you, boss. I got you.
See that? Yeah, that's better. That's more like it. That's Vyasa, y'all. Hey, nah, for real though. Black African Power on that one, bro. I appreciate the build. The information was awesome. I want to stir the pot a little bit. I told Kofi that I would.
Go ahead.
You know what I'm saying? I was gonna let him talk because it's his show, his channel, his platform. But nah, I want him to get up out of his seat like he just did and walk off. Leave his own show. You know what I'm talking about?
I'm trying to eat.
See, now he's trying to eat. And hey, go ahead and put the mic on. Put the mic on, Kofi. Answer the phone. Yeah. See, that's a tip. See how they work? See that? Nah, bro, you did good. But let me stir the pot, though, all seriousness.
Go for it.
The Free African Society was built to repatriate free Africans that have been roaming the Americas for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to stir the pot, why do you think that the Free African Societies, as they developed across America, wanted to get rid of the free blacks so bad that they wanted to repatriate them back to Africa, since a lot of them wanted to be back in Africa anyway?
Can you re-question?
Okay. Why?
What's going with it?
Yeah. I'm talking about the Free African Society, since so many developed. Okay. Why do you think that that a Free African Society would come together to repatriate free blacks from here and take them to Sierra Leone and Liberia? What was the real interest behind repatriating these Africans back? Because it wasn't all Africans. It was only the free blacks.
It sounds to me that you got something I don't know, but from my understanding, a lot of those free black cities and establishments, you see more of them in the Southern Americas, from what I've studied so far and what I'm aware of.
Yeah, you do.
So that becomes another one of those complex answers, because you got to specify on who, where, and the when.
Just any of them, because they all developed up off of each other. You started with one, then another, then another, then another, then another. This is why I'm asking this, because this was a organization that was pretty much built on the foundation of Christianity.
Yeah,
and they
speak on
were
that.
adamant about sending their type of black people back to Africa to do missionary and convert work, and also to get them into the interior where they could not advance. So setting up these places like Sierra Leone and Liberia, although were beneficial in repatriation, it also had a plot behind it, in my opinion. And true story, and I know you listening, and you know where I'm going. Why would they only send the free blacks?
If you remember in our last little chat, when you said you was going to speak on them, that was the first thing I asked you, if it was true that they was established to promote, whether you want to call it missionary work or the spread of Christianity, it's all the same to me. I see that. I think what threw me off posing the question, I didn't know if you was asking pertaining specifically to certain establishments that was being built in presentation I was talking about, because at that point we got to
you had to hint on them. You had to hint on them in your presentation.
At that point we got to make a distinction in between the ones who was born free, politically free, and the ones who ran away and was just considered off on their own, more or less liberated from oppression, and at the time easier to hide because it wasn't the same. It wasn't technology and highways and GPSs at the moment. So they may have been there and just doing the best they could to survive. Now, as far as seeing the promotion of sending, let's say it like this, by the time we became African Americanized, instead of just being solely African, I understand posing that question and asking, why would they send these back but not send us all back? Why would you send the submissive ones back, but you wouldn't send the Jangos back, the wild ones, the ones that you say are uncivilized, the ones that would be a quote unquote a nuisance to their ideology? I get what you're saying. It's almost like sending in double A.
Well, they already had labeled the ones that wouldn't do any work. They knew the type of Africans that when they came off the ships, they were so good at knowing who we were. See, this is the problem I have with the indigenous Aboriginal ignorance. Is that they already knew who we were. That they so much so that they know these people came from Guinea, these people came from Senegal, these people came from Nigeria, these people came from the Congo, these people came from Kenya, these people came from Mozambique. They already knew where we were coming from when we stepped off the boat. They knew the Igbo well. They knew the Igbo was gonna die when they got on the boat. So they had to keep them.
Can I pause for just? Can I jump in for just a second? Because that was that was going to be the next thing I spoke on. How many are familiar with the Igbo landing? Right back in St. Catherine's, the St. Miguel Guadalupe area, where the Igbos are spoken to have come to the Americas, seen the oppression, and then they quote unquote committed a mass suicide by going right back into the ocean, saying that they would rather die than being held in bondage. Are y'all familiar with that story?
Yes.
Okay. So I see what I see where you're going with it. I think that is something that we do need to analyze. I don't understand the Abo theory. I don't get it. Now, one thing about me, is, I tried to say it in the beginning, and I don't know if I said this or not. This was more or less of me trying to put in an application to say, am I worthy of being a student within the group? Not necessarily a member, but just an active student. Because I haven't had enough time to study Africa and indigenous cultures. What time I had at school, I was forced to learn what they was giving me. My desire is to understand humanity on a mass whole, in all cultures. I think we should all take a little bit of time to study history on that level and plane. That's the only reason why I introduced ideas like capitalism, enlightenment, Francis Bacon, just so we can get an understanding of who we up against and what we up against, if that makes any sense, to understand where and when we are. Because one thing I know for certain is the things you don't know about your enemy that often hurt you the most. If you don't know he got a gun in his pocket, you could be in a world of danger. But if you know he got a gun and you don't, you're more likely to act cordial to that situation, if that makes any sense.
Kofi, you want to answer my question? You look antsy. It looked like you almost done chewing. And shrimp tacos tasting good.
Man, I don't even know what's going on. I done walked off like 3 times, man. I've been trying to eat.
You made tacos. Next week, Kofi make tacos.
Hey.
I'm sensing the trend.
That's what it is.
He said so.
That's what it is, man.
Show that purple patch, Kofi. Come on, man. You know Chicago fan.
If y'all watch that in the language we cry in, the first thing, well, the snippet, I don't know if people caught it, but one of the reasons why I made it a point to play it is you can see them building the exact same style of homes.
Right.
You seen it. That's the first thing they showed. If you go,
it's not even just that. Is what Kofi mentioned earlier when you talk about the rice, the cultivation of rice.
Yeah.
It was, we have, and I didn't mean to, yes, I did. I can't say I didn't mean to cut your wisdom. But the pattern is there. Vyasa, you showed the pattern, the culture, what they knew they did. They didn't learn this from no Indians or some people that were already here. These were things that they were already doing. So when people sit here and say that you're indigenous to something, okay, show us. We waiting.
Right. And I don't know.
Who taught you how to cultivate rice?
Since you spoke on patterns, I don't know if y'all noticed that the only last name I really kept going that's not somebody that's already well known is the Factor family. That's my bloodline. And we are classified as Choctaw Freemen. I got my card. I do get some benefits. I'm thankful for those benefits. I don't get as much as I think I deserve or my people deserve, nowhere near it, because I know how much money is being made. I'm fully aware of what they call the $5 Indians. We had to read a book called Seminole Burning. And in it, no, it didn't talk about any Black Seminoles, but it talked about lynchings in Seminole County. But majority of the book was talking about how whites was migrating in and doing their best to either marry in or purchase a contract to get those Indian benefits. So if you can just buy your way into it, what good is it to say, this is what I am? If anybody can be who you are, then you just everybody. You're not even an individual anymore. While we are still sitting back and saying we are individually different. We're not slaves. We African. This is where we came from. So yeah, I'm with you on trying to understand what their ideology is. And that's why I try to lay the pattern out. I didn't want to attack nobody because I don't see the need in that. As long as they keep it respectful towards me, I'll do my best. And the moment they get disrespectful, as long as I can ignore it, I'm out the scene. But I do think it's time to bring these stories forward, because none of this stuff gets mentioned in school. I'm from Oklahoma. Not one part of anything I presented has ever been spoke about in the classroom in Oklahoma. I was often in trouble. I started getting expelled the moment I wrote a paper about the Tulsa riots. 7th grade. From that point on, I was not allowed in the classroom. Just wasn't allowed. I would either be by myself in what they call isolation or suspended constantly because they seen who I identified with. And being poor and black in the place I was at, those was 2 negatives. But these are things we all go through. I'm not going to sit here and make a pity party for myself. Only thing it did was just drive me to want to learn more. But I can't teach myself. I know that would be a foolish mistake. Hence why I said I wanted this to be more or less an application to show I'm not against doing research. I'm not against trying to show proper methodology. I didn't want to tell nobody that was what I was doing, but the way I structured it to where you could see my quotations, you know,
good job.
red, black, et ceteras and et ceteras, just to show I'm willing to sit down, take the time. I know this ain't an overnight accomplishment. I know it took you two, well, everybody on the panel, I know it took y'all years to get where you at. Years. So I know a Mimi's not going to get me there. But I know I can't get, well, I'm not going to say I can't get there on my own, but isn't the saying, if you want to go far, go together? You want to get there fast, go by yourself?
Yeah, if you want to go fast, I mean, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, yeah, man. I mean, you did an excellent job. And when you talk about methodology, I think your methodology, man, was damn good. You know what I'm saying? And that's what we lacking in this so-called conscious community is tephesit. You know, what we call correct method. You know what I'm saying? So a lot of people don't understand what methodology, you know what I'm saying, what methodology is. I mean, you did a good job. I don't know why I didn't think your presentation, I don't know why I thought your presentation was going to be kind of short when I know you kind of like long-winded like me, because I know when I first started, my presentations was like 2-3 hours because I talk a lot.
I asked so like 100 times, Kofi. You sure you want me to do this?
No, because I ain't want to cut you because you was doing excellent, man. And I mean, but I just thought it was gonna be short. But like I said, you a talker like I'm a talker. So I know when we writing and we trying to present information, we presented it the way we talk, and that's how I do my presentation. But I done kind of learn how to stray back from it because you don't want to give them too much at all time. Because you go back and look at some of my presentations on here, they 2.5, 3 hours long because I like to talk. So I present my information the same way. Yeah. All these slides because I like talking. So I don't know why. I thought yours was gonna be short because you long-winded like me. Cause we get on the phone, we be on the phone. I've been to look up, we on the phone 3 hours talking.
Yeah.
So, but you did a excellent job, man. Before I get up off here, man, I want to share my screen real quick. Send to everyone. Hold on. I'm trying to go to it. I don't want to.
While he's doing that, Brother Shine, I will do my best to get that backpack off to you as soon as possible.
He probably done walked away from the mic. You still on here, Sean? He's still on here. He must have walked away. But can y'all see my screen real quick?
I can see.
Okay. I'm trying to make sure everybody in there can see real quick. Yep. Okay.
The character and the musical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Just tomorrow, man. Tune back in tomorrow. We're gonna try to be on about an hour. Give y'all an hour our time. This is per se more. It's you can say it's a presentation / discussion, but it's gonna be more of a discussion tomorrow. Tune back in at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. It's about good character. You know, we always try to demonstrate good character over here. That's what it is with us. You know, we about good character. So,
except for Kofi.
Who, man, whatever. I'm an African, so when I understand African, I understand that our culture is cultivating character. It's cultivating. Not saying that everybody had good character and have good character on the continent. But when you study our traditions and our culture, it is rooted in cultivating good character, cultivating character. So tomorrow we're gonna have a presentation / discussion on good character, moral ethics, and moral values. So I'm gonna try to throw together some slides, and I'm gonna probably be up for a while, throw together some slides, and just give you some working definitions of good character, moral ethics, moral values, and then try to give you an understanding what is good character from an African perspective, moral ethics and moral values from an African perspective. So we'll probably get into a little bit of information and some terms or in the language for as the Ghana people and for as the Nigeria people, what they prefer to as good character and what do they refer to as bad character. Like Sean, I always call Sean Mr. EY Baru, but he's trying to call me the same thing. That's bad character. EY Pele is good character. EY Baru is bad character. So we're going to talk about EY Pele. We're going to talk about a few other different things.
You just really say that?
Did I just say what, man?
You just try to flip your bad character on me?
Bro, I ain't got no bad character.
Man, if y'all could only see the things Kofi been saying.
Man, I ain't got no bad character. But, you know, but tune in tomorrow for that. So I'm just, you know, just giving y'all. And then we're gonna go in. Then once we go in from the Ghana people and the Nigerian people, far as you being a human, but are you being recognized as a person? So we'll go into that with the moral values, the moral personalhood, and so forth. And then we're gonna be dealing with some slides from the Ma'at book. So we'll be going a little bit further in the Ma'at book with those slides with good building good character. What is Ma'at? And a few other different things. So tune into that tomorrow. Kofi, I'll be on the platform. Sean will be on the platform. Asai M. Ka will be on the platform. T'Challa Bangara will be on the platform for the discussion. Vyasa Niccolo will be back on the platform discussion. And hopefully we'll have my big brother Unc on there on here tomorrow as well. And all those will be on the panel. And it's just going to be like an open discussion from the slides. So tune in tomorrow for that. And then next Sunday, I'll come back and do another presentation, the musical instruments in Mother Africa. So I'll be explaining how important music is, and then be going through a lot of musical instruments that you may not even know that are musical instruments. I have a few on here already that you may look like, what the heck is some of those things? But I'll explain what they are and what are their uses, and I'll give a little visuals as far as the video, a few videos to show you how some of these instruments are played and how some of them sound, which will be next Sunday. And I'll be doing a double hitter next Sunday. So I'll be doing this presentation on my platform at 6 p.m. And then I'll be doing a presentation on Kofi, not Kofi, but on the Mossy Warrior Clan channel at 2 p.m. I'll throw it up in the group tomorrow. But it's another presentation on a secret society in Africa. So it's gonna be a good presentation on a secret society in Africa, and I'll give the name tomorrow. I might throw a little commercial up tomorrow on the presentation to promote the presentation. So just tune in. We working. Again, good job, brother. Vyasa, good job, man. On that note, Satep, if you got something else, hold on, real quick, go support the channels. Please go support the channels. Go support the Seshuma Ani Meta Nature, which is a group of like-minded individuals, which me, Sean, on the platform, and Satep and Rob, we are members of the Seshuma Ani Meta Nature. We are like-minded individuals who are striving to be, we are aspiring to be scribes. So we're studying the running Kemet, which is the language, and the writing script, which is the session metadata. We have a lot of content on our YouTube page, so please go subscribe to the Seshuma Ani Meta group. Also go to our Facebook page on Facebook, which is Seshuma Ani Meta, where we have conversations about the language and about the writing script. And about different things, you know, we drop with Jews and the culture, also in the videos as well. Also, please, if you hadn't subscribed to my channel, please go subscribe right now to this channel, Kofi Paisai TV, the channel that takes the Black man, Black woman, and Black child Eurocentric mind and Africanize it. It is the Black African Netflix Also, please go subscribe to the Monster Warrior Clan channel, which I am a member of, and brother Sean, who's on the panel. Please go subscribe us. We appreciate all the support and the love we've been getting. So please go subscribe. Please support. Support. The Tipping Ride, you got something to say, man, before we get out of here?
Yeah, no, I just want to say, man, that was a stellar presentation by the brother. That presentation right there, that's one of my top presentations, and I really don't say that too often. And I know we get on here, we blow each other horn, all that was good, but like that was really a stellar presentation, and it was proper methodology. And I like how his words was in black, the quotes was in red. So I mean, like everything the brother did tonight, it was what I expected just from that 30-minute conversation prior to the hangout. So I definitely appreciate being on the panel with this brother, and he did a great job, and I'm definitely looking forward to see what other works he has to come up with. So Iwa Pele. I don't know what that means, but I know it means something good.
Good character, man. Good character.
Okay. I know it means something good. So shit.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, man. That was real good though, man. It really was. I'm not lying. Like,
I appreciate it, and I made it all the way through without cussing. That's good for me.
Yeah, because I can't.
What you call me, Sean? What you call me, Sean?
I'm ready to take y'all off the channel for tomorrow, then. I don't need y'all on.
Nah. That's why I don't be saying too much though.
It's all good, man. Sean, you got any last words, man?
I love it. He be like, but hold on, Kofi. You be cussing too.
I have in the past. I have. I caught myself. I have. Okay. I agree.
Wait till you do them declarations of innocence tonight.
Oh man. Yeah, this been fun, man. But family, we finna get up out of here. Hey, hold on. We appreciate y'all for tuning in and rocking with y'all. I had to say that, man, because y'all could be doing anything, you know what I'm saying? And I don't know if it's gonna y'all could be doing anything, man. But we appreciate, man, y'all for rocking out with us, man. Y'all could have been, I know y'all time is precious because I know my time is precious. I know y'all don't want y'all time wasted, just like I don't want my time wasted and other brothers don't want their time wasted. We just appreciate y'all for supporting, tuning in, you know what I'm saying, engaging in the chat and bringing forth peace in the chat and bringing forth good character in the chat, you know what I'm saying, as always. So we really appreciate y'all, man. I really do. And on that note, we'll see y'all Mondays. Tune in tomorrow at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time for the presentation / discussion by myself, Vyasa Niccolo, Any Harris, Sean Calfunny, Satepin Ra, Asar M. Ka, and hopefully Big Brother Unc will be joining the panel for the discussion tomorrow on the good character, moral ethics, and moral values. And on that note, we out of here.
Man in the full knowledge of himself is a superb and supreme picture of creation. When man becomes possessor of the knowledge of himself, he becomes master of his environment and captain of his own ship, the director of his own destiny, the accomplisher of his own ends. Man should understand himself because man is full of knowledge, and this knowledge is a gift of nature. When Mother Nature created man, she deprived him of nothing. He was given the faculty of understanding all things around him. This faculty for understanding has not been taken away from him. None of his senses have been taken away from him. So there is no excuse for the black man.
Raising my team, red, black, and green, queens and kings, salute, now scream, I should. Bring forth another hit, I should. Five I'm raising my team, red, black, and green, queens and kings, salute, now scream, I should. Bring forth another hit, I should. Five I should.